share with you two passages from the Bible, one from the Hebrew Scriptures and one from the New Testament. Essentially cut of the same cloth. Beginning with Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit. They will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord, to display God's glory. And from Luke chapter 1, we listen in as Mary speaks the following. He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty. So is the reading of God's holy word. I invite us to pray. Eternal God of wisdom and compassion, we acknowledge that this is a very busy season in many respects. Our bodies are busy to some extent, and our minds are busy with to-do lists, plans. So my prayer would be that as we listen to these words from Isaiah, from Luke, that we're able to open ourselves to a time of quiet, to a time of receptivity to your love, to your joy in our life. I ask this in your holy name. Amen. Very often when I go to a bookstore, which isn't very often, but when I do, I'll pull a new book off the shelf and I'll go right to the back jacket to read what other writers have to say about this particular book. And I'm a little embarrassed to admit that. I'd like to be able to claim that I just simply take a book on its own merits, but I do confess that I want to hear what other leading lights have to say. I don't think I'm unique. I think that's why people probably pay big money for endorsements. Well, this passage that I just read, the first one from Isaiah, stands very tall in the pantheon of literature. Not only does it shine in its own right as a powerful word of comfort to the Israelites, who had been freed from captivity to the Babylonians, but were still picking up the pieces. But 500 years later, it's quoted by none other than the Son of God. And that's a pretty good endorsement. Probably better than Stephen King or J.K. Rowling. So echoing down the centuries is this persistent, maybe even nagging message about relief to the poor and the hungry and the marginalized. And if the Son of God reciting this isn't enough, now the mother of the Son of God weighs in with her own rendition of this same theme, the last few verses I read to you. As she rejoices in the God who lifts up the lowly, brings down the high and mighty, and tends to those in need. So whether you happen to find the message in Isaiah or Luke, it's a pretty good bet that this is important to God, and to us as well. It is the Sunday of joy. It's also the point in the season when procrastinators like me are starting to fret a little bit about getting those little bundles of joy tucked in under the Christmas tree in time for the holiday. Because as much as we may sing about the 12 days of Christmas, most people don't want to open their gifts on January 5th. Kind of reflecting a bit on how my attitudes about gifts have changed over the years. As a kid, of course, the bigger the gift, the better. best of all was if a gift couldn't even be put under the tree and had to be hidden in the garage. But then as I got older, I began to appreciate more and more of the merits of very thin gifts. The kind you could put in an envelope. Different gifts bring different joys at different seasons of life. But the kind of gifts we're looking at today on this Sunday of Joy are different still. Many of them, as I alluded to with the kids, can't be wrapped at all. Years ago, I'm sure some of you remember this, there was a UCC program known as Unwrapping Our Gifts. And it was designed to help folks discover their God-given abilities and talents. And I think some of you can probably vouch for this, but in many cases, people were utterly shocked as the group they were in, the small group, identified certain gifts that these people had they didn't even have a clue about. And unlike the paisley necktie from Uncle Harry, those kinds of gifts really can't be returned. And why would you? They're meant to be shared. The kind of gifts that really are gifts that keep on giving. You might return the chartreuse sweater from Aunt Martha, but you probably will hold on to things like kindness, patience, creativity, faith. The kind of things that even L.L. Bean can't wrap in a box. But these are the very gifts that Isaiah spoke of, as did Mary, and the very gifts offered by Jesus as well. And you can't buy these with a mountain of cash. And yet they're all within reach of even the poorest. In the famous story from Charles Dickens, Little Tiny Tim hopes that those who see him walking with a crutch will be reminded of the one who healed the lame and gave sight to the blind. Inspiration from a tiny, crippled English boy. Of course, some of these gifts are pretty expensive. Not in money, but sometimes in courage. For example, blowing the whistle on abuse of some kind, or resisting desecration of our land or water, or standing with victims of bigotry or racism. Precious things that sometimes have the power to free the oppressed and maybe even bind up the brokenhearted. But some gifts of this sort are more subtle. Years ago, I was given a gift by a little boy with muscular dystrophy. He helped me break through my self-consciousness of the moment, grab him and his wheelchair, pull him out onto the dance floor, and dance up a storm, he and I, to the song by the name of Celebration, of all things. And I don't know who'd been feeling more imprisoned, me and my self-consciousness or him and his wheelchair. But we both broke free. And I thought I was helping him. I guess there are a lot of ways to liberate the captives and let the oppressed go free. Sometimes it comes from a young boy in a wheelchair who just wants to dance. Sometimes it comes from a courageous telling of the truth. But however it happens, I think it causes the light of God to glow a bit brighter. And that light needs to grow. I spent an entire season mowing the lawn ever so carefully around my evergreen tree that still sported the Christmas lights from last year. Ever optimistic. But for all my care, when I went to plug in those lights in November, in the words of Yukon Cornelius, nothing. It was time for new lights. Sometimes we need new lights. We might need to get creative in letting that light shine. Here's an example. The Gilead Church in Chicago was started by a couple of UCC seminary graduates. They wanted to try something different. A church that meets in a bar on the north side in the Chicago neighborhood. Their slogan is that they are, this is a quote, open and affirming, anti-racist, local, organic, slow church, just peace, free range, real butter Christians. That kind of covers a lot. During their Advent gatherings this year, they'll be offering people in their worship time a chance to tell their story, believing that all of our stories are part of God's story. And for those so inclined, Gilead will have on these Sundays, on site, a tattoo artist available for you to depict a part of your story on your skin in temporary ink. Our stories do evolve. Putting our story on our skin and putting our skin on the line for the sake of Christ. Now, this church may not be for everyone, but it is for a whole lot of folks who find it hard to make their way into our traditional churches, and yet have beautiful stories to tell. They have deep needs. They have priceless gifts to offer. Gifts such as faith, truth, encouragement, hope. Gifts that just might be wrapped a little bit differently than what we're used to. But then again, Jesus didn't show up looking the way most Jews were expecting the Messiah to look. I don't know if he had tattoos, but he did eventually have some marks on his back. Marks that no respectable Jew could have imagined, actually would have thought abhorrent, but marks that brought light and hope to us all. When I was a kid, I used to get a kick out of wrapping Christmas gifts so as to disguise them. Maybe you did too. Putting a set of earrings in a television box. Record albums were always tough. Can't do a whole lot with them, and you couldn't do a whole lot to disguise a bicycle. At least I couldn't. But I tried my best, because I wanted to keep people guessing until the very last moment. In the process, I probably single-handedly supported the wrapping paper industry. But when it comes to offering gifts like peace and justice, we may package them in surprising ways, too. I don't remember which of you told me this story, so pardon me, but one of you told me about a story of somebody walking along the road when someone pulled up in a car and tossed out a piece of trash. So it happened that they almost immediately had to stop at a red light. And so someone that was walking had the presence of mind to pick up the piece of trash, walk up to the car, knock gently on the window, and say, "Excuse me, I think you dropped this." There are ways to make a plea for justice without getting angry and all bent out of shape. Creative ways. Isaiah concludes these words from today with a reference to those who are oaks of righteousness as they show forth the glory of God. But you know, even an oak has to start out as an acorn. Well, it wasn't an oak, but the last thing we did, as we walked out of Red Cedar Lodge a few weeks ago, was to dig up a tiny little red cedar sapling about this big alongside the steps. It's planted in a clay pot in my house, and I want to coax it along. Add it to the trees in my yard one day, perhaps. It just sort of reminds me that it doesn't take a bulldozer to cultivate new life, or peace, or justice. Sometimes you can do it with a teaspoon. Tiniest gifts, however absurdly small they may seem at the moment, have the power to show forth the glory of God. And I think truly bring joy to the world.